Hi, welcome to Cover to Cover. I'm Mark DeWitt. Today we have the author, Annette Januzzi Wick, author of I'll Have Some of Yours. This is a story about what her mother taught her about dementia, cookies, music, the outside, and her life inside a care home. Annette, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Wonderful to be here today.
This book, growing up as a kid, you got strong parents, and now all of a sudden it's like the day changes, and now you're kind of the adult, I guess.
Absolutely.
Now tell me a little bit about this book and why you wrote it.
Well, the book originated out of a blog that I kept for a number of years. My mother suffered from dementia for a period of about 10 years, and at the time, I was living in Cincinnati. She was still in northern Ohio. I was writing a lot. I was working in the dementia field, teaching writing workshops for caregivers, working with the Alzheimer's Association. But this came out of my personal writing, and it was really just a way to stay connected to my mom at a time in which I was starting to feel extremely disconnected for all sorts of reasons, as you can imagine. My mom might be on the phone 1 minute and then off the phone the next, or even if I saw her in person, she wasn't always present in her mind, or she'd be asking the same questions over and over and over again. So like any other writer who uses their craft to process, to make sense, that's what the blog was for a long time. After I developed a number of followers, just felt like this was turning into a little bit more than just a blog. My mother passed away in June of 2018, and at the time, the care community in which she lived, the executive director approached me and said, the staff here, executives, we've all been reading your blog, and we think this has value as a book, as a resource. And to be honest, I'd been working on several other projects. Almost anything else I could do that was not related to dementia were the projects I was working on, because I was in the midst of some really heavy stuff with my mom in her latter years. I took some time and thought about it, went back and I met with the staff and felt that, just listening to them and remembering what I went through, remembering what it was like to be me, what it was like to be my mother at the stages at which she was at, I walked away feeling like, yeah, this definitely has some value as a resource. And now it feels everywhere I go, everyone has a relation or a friend of that is coping with Alzheimer's and dementia in the family.
So you used Alzheimer's and dementia together. And we had this talk the other day, me and another person. Comes up occasionally. Alzheimer's and dementia. Would you call that really the same thing, or what's the difference?
Dementia is the umbrella term, and there's many, many different types of dementia. Actually, I was in a meeting not too long ago with a dementia professional, who mentioned that there's hundreds of different types of dementias that they have documented. Alzheimer's is really just a subset of that, and can be the most tragic. In particular, if you have early onset Alzheimer's, an individual is going to decline rapidly. They know those particular things about that subtype of dementia. My mom did not have Alzheimer's. There's so much that's the same all the way throughout. It doesn't matter what kind of dementia. The forgetting doesn't change. That's a little bit I don't have a medical degree, so I'm not going to put on my medical hat.
Well, and I've always heard that when you get dementia, as it progresses, it can be the demise of you, because you not only forget about things past and present, but soon you'll forget how to breathe.
Right. And your brain starts to shut down certain functions. It could shut down your kidneys. It can shut down all sorts of organs that you begin to lose control over. So yes, dementia can obviously be the end state for many, many people.
I'll have some of yours. Now, this book, when you wrote it, you're writing from your personal experience. How tough was that, and when did you really start writing this? It probably wasn't after your mother passed. It was during?
Correct. Yeah. It would have been over the course of the 10 years that she had dementia. The topic just started to seep into my writing and then became consuming. I have poems. There's some poems that I wrote that I would take an incident with my mom. I could only capture it in poem at that moment because it was just so powerful. And there were several essays that were truly expanded from a poem. And then there's some essays that I took and they'd be, 1,000 words long, and then I just condensed them down to a poem, and they meant so much more at that point in time. So, as a writer, you just play around with your words and try to figure out which is going to have the greatest impact for people. One of the reasons this is it's a collection of essays, and we wanted to keep it as such as opposed to a complete memoir, because we felt that that would be overwhelming for people. They might not have the time to pick up and read an entire story. They're going through something that's extremely emotional. So they want to be able to pick up, put down, pick up, put down. They want to be able to read something that's funny and then maybe not so funny. We wanted to offer, when I say we, I talk about my editor, I talk about working with the staff where my mother lived. We wanted to be able to offer something that was digestible for people, because when you're in those situations, it can be overwhelming to pick up a 300-page book.
When I first had kids, it's like, okay, what do you do? Because there's no instructional manual that comes with this. I'll have some of yours, perhaps. This could be an instructional book for those going through the same process that maybe what you went through and wrote about?
Absolutely. Sometimes I call this my how not to, because there's mistakes in here. I acknowledge the mistakes that I felt I made. I had a woman come up to me after one of my book signings. She had read the book and she said, the part I like best are the mistakes that you admitted to making, where you said, I wished I could have done this, or I regret this. She felt that that's where she could learn the most from. She felt she could learn the most from mistakes that I might have admitted to, or areas in which I could have made a different decision. And not that they were wrong decisions, but what I wrote in the book might shed some light on decisions that people have to make in the future. So it's written from that vantage point as a personal, here's what happened to me, here's how we made it through, my mother and I, as well as anybody else who was with us on that journey.
I've heard of these memorial videos, and they're not necessarily after the death, but they're before, and having maybe a couple cameras and talking. It's kind of an interview with the parent, if you will. What do you think of that, and is that something maybe you did or you would have liked to have done?
You want to talk about regrets? Yes. That's definitely in my top. I have a video on my YouTube site of my mother singing. It's a really short clip, and that's all I have of her singing. I wished I would have had more. I wished I would have known at the time that she was developing her dementia, and this is a pretty consistent theme, but I was busy raising my children. I was out of town. My children were going through high school and college. So it was a very busy time for us. And that's not to say that, you can't make time for your parents, because they would have made time for you. But there's so much I wish I would have had the time to document. I had a lot of questions. I go through that. Some of the book is really about searching and trying to find what was the nature of the relationship I had with my mother when we were young. How did we navigate through that? And how does somebody reconcile all of those things that you never said or did in the end when it's too late? What can you do to make up for that?
I'll have some of yours that give some thought, I guess, to the reader of things that if you have your parents right now, you could do so you wouldn't have the regrets that you had.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My father and my parents moved here to Cincinnati so that I could oversee their care, and he passed away 8 months later. And so then the duty fell to me to take care of my mother. At the time, though, I said to my dad, I said, now that you're here, we're going to sit down and you're going to tell me all those stories I wanted you to tell me, or that you were always trying to tell me. Let's take the time. Let's do this. And it never worked out for obvious reasons. But by then it was too late to do those kinds of things with my mom. But absolutely, memorial videos, anything you can do to capture just brief statements. And in the book, I've got a lot of funny moments where I've just captured funny things that my mom said, and also poignant things that I felt like I knew she was still with me in the moment. There's a new business/app out called MemoryWell. And what they're doing is they're going around and they're interviewing. They might have a contract with a care community, and they will interview all the family members and then write a narrative about their loved one. That way, when new staff members come in, they can get to know more than what you could just put down on a piece of paper. And truly, like, that to me was my number one job as a caregiver, was to ensure that the staff knew who my mother had been and knew what she could still be, and to impart that wisdom so that they felt comfortable, so that they felt they had a relationship and they could feel like they were family to her too.
Well, if you're just tuning in, this is Cover to Cover. I'm Mark DeWitt. We're talking with Annette Januzzi Wick. She has a brand new book, I'll Have Some of Yours. And this is what her mother taught her about dementia, cookies, music, the outside, and her life inside a care home. You know, I remember back in the 80s for me, my grandmother went to a nursing home.
Okay.
And it wasn't always the most pleasant place at the time. Has nursing and care changed over the years?
Yes and no. I had that same experience back in the 80s with a grandmother of mine who had a brain tumor. It was frightening. We grew up behind a facility that they called a sanitarium. I'm very familiar with that particular mindset. There's such a wide variety of care settings for people nowadays. There is, they call them life plan communities, some of them in which there's kind of active older adults, and they take you all the way on through if you need skilled nursing and memory care. There's some facilities that are strictly memory care, and there's some that are strictly nursing homes, and a lot of it depends on where you are. Some of it depends on financially what you're able to do with your loved one's finances and with your own finances. There's places that I've been inside. I have an older sister who's in a care home who had a stroke, and she is on Medicaid, but she's in a very nice setting because they happen to have beds open that were available for Medicaid. Would she have to move someday? Possibly. And I think that's the other fact I want to impart to people, is that there will be times when you may have to move your loved one. The first place is not always going to be the last place. And it might not, it's only the right place for right now. It's really important for people to keep that in mind, because you can get attached. You can feel like somebody's failing, like you're failing, like the facility is failing, but maybe it's really just a change of venue that your loved one needs.
Maybe you've gone through this, maybe you haven't, but from what I understand, when you go into a home, you're paying for that. And if you can no longer pay for that before Medicare covers, you have to sell all of your property in order for the government to continue to pay.
They do a 5-year look back on where your finances have been, and did you all of a sudden decide you were going to gift away all of your money to your children so that then you could declare that you had no funds at that point in time then you were coming into the facility. There's so many different financing models. There are places where you could, if you can commit to 3 years of the monthly payments, as long as you do that, then you are guaranteed a place and a home beyond the 3 years. There's a whole financial reason behind that, because they anticipate that the average lifespan of somebody coming in at that point in time is just about 3 years. Some might make it at 1 year, some might make it at 5, and it all evens out. So, you really have to do your homework. You have to understand what your finances are. But most of all, you have to understand what is going to be best for your loved one and where they are.
So it's not the food that's going to kill you.
Oh, it could be.
I'll Have Some of Yours. This book, how long in the making? I know that you'd mentioned it was, it came from blogs, and plus you're writing.
The short answer is about 10 years. The longer answer would be after I met with the staff at my mom's care home in October timeframe. When I decided that, yes, this is truly going to be a book, I spent the next couple of months printing everything out, collating it, trying to figure out what the structure of the book was going to be, what would be in, what would be out. And then through February, March, April, I worked with an editor. We cut it down even further. At one point in time, it was about 95,000 words. We're down to about 75,000 words in the end. And then started working with a graphic designer. And then it takes all that time to move through the channels of Amazon and Ingram to make sure that you have your distribution channels all set up. Luckily, I had published a book before, so I understood enough of the process and how to file for copyrights. I had my stable of ISBN numbers, which, if anybody knows, you have to buy them in tens, or you used to have to buy them in tens, but probably not the case through Amazon and whatnot anymore. You have to buy an ISBN, absolutely.
Really?
You have to, and it has to all be registered and submitted and approved, et cetera, et cetera. So by the time I got through all of that, it was August 1st that I released. So I'd say a good 10 months that it was, this was everything. And it was part of my grieving process, but it was also part of giving myself the gift of compassion and saying, you did this, and you did it with what you had available and to the best of your knowledge. And it was a gift back, I think, from my mom, too. You know, it was a way of her, by looking back, I was able to kind of take back some of her life, and so that it wasn't all about dementia. I go into just some backstories about growing up with my mom, or even some of her stories about growing up. So it was really a way of just bringing her forward with me into the future.
I'm intrigued by the ISBN number. Do you get to pick your own number, or is it like the License Bureau and they just give you a plate?
No, there's pretty specific numbers that they assign to you. And then the last couple numbers are based on really like the number of books that you've had published. And so if you'll notice, like my ISBN number has a number 2 in it. And so that's my second book under my particular author. But if you were a series, you know, it's a fascinating, the whole publishing industry is really just something that's fascinating in and of itself. And I think that's why people continue to want to write books, because they're still very intrigued by the notion of being able to do it. But if you go back years and years and years ago and you read old books from 1870s, or you read about people that were writing back in the early 1900s, people were basically self-publishing their own books at that point in time too. And then they did their own marketing, did their own promoting, just like you and I are doing here now today.
It's what's old is new again.
Well, exactly.
And now you talked about your first book that you wrote. Tell me a little bit about that, a memoir.
That too is a memoir. It's called I'll Be in the Car. And that's also available through Amazon and other online retailers. My first husband died of cancer, and we were both very young. I was 31 when he was first diagnosed, and he was 36. We had a young son at home. He was a year old. He was diagnosed with leukemia and fought for 3 years through a bone marrow transplant and all sorts of treatments, and went back and forth. Actually, we spent some time in the Pacific Northwest, and that's where he had his bone marrow transplant. We were living out there in between. It was kind of a long story there, which is all part of the book on, you know, how do you give up living in this place that's always been a place of your dreams to come back to a city such as Cincinnati, where you knew your husband was going to get the best care he could, and you knew that you were going to be surrounded by love. It was a different sort of reckoning for me. That book was published back in 2006, but I found that it still has a lot of resonance and relevance. I think I mentioned earlier before we walked in, Mark, that I had been in an incident where I'd been crossing in a crosswalk and a car hit me. So I've been down the last couple of months. And in that time, I've had to learn how to be that person to receive caregiving. And I've had to learn how to be vulnerable. And I thought, you know, it's been a long time since I went back and read I'll Be in the Car. So I took a day and decided I'm going to read through this and see what I still have yet to learn, or see it from a different vantage point. And it's really interesting because I wrote in the foreword to that book that I had written I'll Be in the Car as a map for myself in the future in case I ever need it again. And here I was needing a map again, needing to know, how do I get the strength back to move forward? How do I find the courage again? So it was really just a rewarding read. I don't know how often authors really go back and read their own work. I'm still a little too close to I'll Have Some of Yours to really read it and feel like I'm not going to have the, oh, ick, I should have edited that, to just read it for the clarity at which it might offer me in my life. The title, I'll Be in the Car, I'll Have Some of Yours. I had somebody ask me at a book signing if your next book is going to start with the contraction I'll, and this was after my incident with the car. And I said, just without thinking, I said, I think I can name it I'll Be in the Crosswalk. So that was I don't know that there's a book in any of that, but we'll see.
I'll Have Some of Yours, of course, available on Amazon, like you said, some bookstores also.
Bookstores can order it, absolutely. You can order it through the library in order to read and get on the reading list there. You're welcome to visit my website, contact me. I'd be happy to hand deliver you a copy. My ebook should be available by a week before Christmas. As I stated, a lot of things kind of got shuffled to the back after my accident. So I'm just now getting back with ebooks, and we've been talking about Audible books, which I really want to make sure I have that available too.
Growing up, I didn't really know that many people, I don't think, that had dementia, that had Alzheimer's. Probably wasn't named that back then. You were looking at people that were senile, and I didn't know what the heck that meant, I guess, when I was younger. It seems like there's more people nowadays with dementia. Why is that? What's your thinking? I know you're not a doctor or anything.
I don't know if it's my thinking so much as it's a fact that we're living longer. My mom had breast cancer. She had several different incidences which could have taken her away from us, but she always rallied. Physically, she was stable. And then it was her mind that began to let go. So she beat breast cancer. She beat the cancers. My father, same thing, had he kept living, would have eventually developed maybe some Parkinson's related dementia, but he would have already beat having stents in his heart. And medicine and science is a good thing, but it's also causing us to live beyond what our minds are sometimes capable of doing. And so I think we're seeing more of an incidence. And we're also recognizing it more. We're recognizing it at an earlier stage, and we're not calling it any sort of psychosis where people would have been admitted to an institution and therefore then they're removed from society and we don't see them. So it's prevalent. The SCAN Foundation is recently putting forth an online movement for millennials. There's a lot of millennials who are caregivers to their grandparents now, something that you would have never anticipated as well, too, because my grandparents all died by the time I was 18. And I think that's pretty true for most of the people my generation. There are individuals that are being called, for lack of a better term, elder orphans, where they have dementia, they're in a care home of some sort, and they are outliving their children. And there is nobody left to be their power of attorney, to be their executor. And they are falling into this bucket of how do we handle them? How do we support their needs? Who advocates for them? It's a fascinating, fascinating disease as long as you're not the one who's having to cope with it.
In your book, I'll Have Some of Yours, you start off with taking your mother and your father to that nursing home.
Mm-hmm.
If your parents were like mine, they were like, when we get older, we've got the insurance for the nursing home, or we're going to be all set for the nursing home. But I think you found out, kind of like I did, that I don't know that hardly anybody's ever ready for a nursing home, are they?
No, I don't think so either. Part of taking that on at an earlier stage is because if you do develop dementia in your home, you can find everything you want because of muscle memory, right? Even now, you and I, at our age, we can find what we want just based on muscle memory.
Well, I can barely find it.
Well, yeah, I might be in that category right now, too. As you progress, the same thing can happen, and so you're able to hide some of your dementia in that particular case. Then you move into a new setting, and everything is new. and it causes a lot of disruption for everybody. So there are very important reasons to determine early enough, where is going to be the best place. But obviously it's based on who's taking care of you, what your financial abilities are, and where you are in your disease as well too. I know my father was definitely not ready. I couldn't even get him to downsize from the family home. And we had a very large family home. I grew up, 5 siblings. He had always wanted a lot of property, and it was very difficult to say, let's just look at these patio homes down the street in the same town. And my father was not interested in doing that. I think over time, I'm watching a lot of people my age. I'm just going to come right out and say I'm 53, but I'm watching a lot of people my age and a little bit older who are downsizing from the family home. And they're moving into condos, and then maybe they'll move to a condo in the town where they have 1 or 2 kids living. So we're a lot more mobile these days. And I think that's going to lead to the ability for us to transition a little bit easier. And also, I don't know what memory care homes are going to look like in the future when we're ready for it. They might be back into like a multi-generational setting that might be a better option for people.
Well, as you heard Annette, she said she's 33, and she looks 33, actually.
Thank you.
What I would guess. Dementia. I don't know if that's good or bad, because when you really have a severe case of dementia, everything's new for you, and that can't be too bad either, I wouldn't think.
I can't imagine either. There were definitely some gifts in that for my mother. She suffered from incontinence. There's a lot of different incidences that are embarrassing for people. You know, she could just revert to being the 2 or 3-year-old mentally and let somebody else take care of her. They let somebody else give her a shower. And so, yes, in a way, you don't have your mind, but you don't have to do all the thinking about, do I need a shower today? What should I cook for dinner? Who's going to do the laundry? You know, where are all my kids? And somebody should close the door. What's the weather going to be like today? Just all those random questions that go through your head. You know, she was relieved of the weight of having to consider those questions. So there are some gifts. But for me, who's watched her go through that, and then now when I'm forgetting something, it's very aggravating, because I feel that I'm always asking myself, am I heading in that direction? So knowing a lot is really good, but knowing too much is not a good thing.
Well, the book is I'll Have Some of Yours by Annette Januzzi Wick. What her mother taught her about dementia, cookies, music, the outside, and her life inside a care home. Maybe you're getting to the place where your parents need that. You can check out I'll Have Some of Yours. Truly an inspirational book.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate being here today. You can go to my website, AnnetteJWick.com, and find out all sorts of information about me, about some of my other speaking appearances. That's how you can contact me if you'd like. I'd love to hear from you if you had a chance to listen to us today. I'd love to be able to stay in touch and let you know when my Audible book comes out. I think that'll be important. But it's been a real, as I mentioned earlier, what a gift of wisdom this has been for me to be out and speaking with communities, speaking with individuals who are trying to cope with everything that I grappled with. And I hope that everybody finds a little nugget like I did in all of their journey.
We've been listening to Cover to Cover. I'm Mark DeWitt, along with Annette Januzzi Wick, author of her new book, I'll Have Some of Yours.